They're live.
Good morning. This is Joint Justice Oversight, October 26, 2023. Before we start, I'd like to just offer a moment of silence for the tragedy in Maine. Pretty close to home. And, for me, it's, the idea that it can't happen here is pretty foreign when it happens over in Lewiston, Maine, a town very similar to many Vermont communities. So I think a moment of silence is ordered. Thank you. Today's meeting is set up in large part to be about the juvenile justice system and some of the challenges our Department of Children and Families, as well as providers and law enforcement and workers in the department, et cetera, have been facing since the closure of Woodside. And I'm sure that many of you may have read 7 Days article by Joe Sexton yesterday regarding Woodside and some of the failures there. But it doesn't lessen the fact that we don't have a high-end system of care at this point. So I'm going to turn it over to Representative Emmons to run the meeting and introduce our first witness.
Thank you, Senator. So we have with us the Commissioner of DCF. And there you are, Chris. And the Commissioner of DPS, as well as the Deputy Commissioner of DCF. So the three of you, I believe, we do have a presentation. And if I can just, in the world of citing a state facility or a facility that is for state function, there's the department that's going to be offering the program is involved, but the department that is actually doing the work on putting out any requests for proposals or putting out any specifics in terms of construction, that is the Department of Buildings and General Services. And they work in tandem with the respective departments or department that's going to be doing the operations of the program. So we need to keep that in context, that both departments here are working. BGS is the one who put out the RFPs, but they've incorporated the needs of the Department of Children and Family Services within that RFP. The bids will come back to the Department of Buildings and General Services. So I just want to lay that foundation there for folks to understand the dynamics. So I'll turn it over to you folks. And I'm assuming, Chris, you're the first one to go.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for doing that table setting. For the record, my name is Chris Winters. I'm the Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families. And as you said, I'm joined today by Commissioner Fitch from Buildings and General Services and Deputy Commissioner Radke of the Family Services Division. We do have a presentation here for you today. Happy to take questions as we go or at the end of your preference. So I'll just start it rolling. This is a report on the DCF high-end system of care. It's an update in accordance with Act 23. We are reiterating the high-end system of care plan program types for you today. You'll see that abbreviation HESOC, which is what we use internally. We're very fond of acronyms within AHS DCF. I think I've come to know most of them in my first 7 months. So HESOC expansion updates for you all today. A little talk about the stabilization and treatment settings, a foundational principles statement, partner engagement efforts, and other recommendations. And you'll see here in this presentation, we have a link to the DCF Act 23 report, which brings us here today. I did want to address, somewhat the elephant in the room. Senator Sears mentioned the article that came out yesterday on Woodside. Some of the comments that I've made about this is Woodside's shadow still looms large over DCF and everything we do in trying to rebuild the system of care in a way that doesn't repeat the mistakes that were made with the Woodside facility. Many people within DCF are horrified by the article, by what happened at Woodside. Our work at DCF is protecting children. I've learned that in my first 7 months at DCF that I am surrounded by people who have dedicated their lives to protecting children. And they don't want to make those same mistakes that we made with Woodside, nor does anyone around this table. So we have to look at lessons learned from that model to ensure that we're not going to be repeating it. That first and foremost, we have to have a system of therapeutic treatment with providers at a variety of levels of care. And it's not just one facility that can't serve all of the needs that we have among Vermont's children. The system has to be therapeutic with appropriate trauma-informed treatment and educational supports to go with it. There has to be transparency, oversight, and accountability for the entire system, but more so for the highest levels of care, particularly for any locked or secure sites. And I think we've also learned that the state should not be both the ultimate regulator and the provider of services at a new secure facility. Here's a quick look at the current high-end system of care capacity that has been diminished. You can see we're still trying to build back from where we were pre-pandemic in a variety of settings: secure programming, crisis stabilization, mental health emergency beds, short-term stabilization, intensive residential, and community-based residential. You'll see on the far right column there the actual capacity that we have as compared to pre-pandemic capacity down across the board with an overall average of 65% capacity of where we were prior to the pandemic. Just a little bit around the different levels of care. I'm kind of fond of the way that Interim Commissioner Harry Chen described our system with many levels, including an emergency room. And we're currently operating without that emergency room. It's like operating a hospital without having that highest acute needs piece of it. And it has a huge impact on the rest of the system. These are the 4 types of levels of care that we talk about. Short-term secure stabilization. So that's a hardware secured physical structure with generalized therapeutic programming designed to immediately manage acute safety crises for any justice involved need. And that's the piece where we have quite a deficit right now. Short-term secure treatment. Hardware secured physical structure with specialized therapeutic programming designed to address behaviors that present risk to personal or public safety for appropriate justice involved youth. Again, we're far below capacity there. Staff secure crisis stabilization. That's community-based physical structure with generalized or specialized therapeutic programming designed to immediately manage acute crises for any youth, including appropriate justice involved youth. That's the community-based model that we've turned to much more after the closure of Woodside. Psychiatric residential treatment. That's again, a community-based physical structure with specialized therapeutic services designed to serve youth with intensive mental health or developmental needs, including appropriate justice involved youth. Here's a little bit about our broad approach that the youth that DCF generally supports have experienced some form of trauma in their lives. They've had significant adverse childhood experiences, and they experience mental health challenges as a result of that. So consistent with that more therapeutic approach, for decades, Vermont's been moving toward the least restrictive settings possible in a variety of our systems of care. And we know that setting matters, that brain science shows the value of nature for promoting healing and brain cognitive development. And just a reminder, and I think a silver lining for the article that came out yesterday is to focus more attention on the youth who are in crisis. These are youth that are our neighbors, they're our friends, they're students, they're in our families. And we, the communities, as well as the state systems, have an obligation to serve and support those children.
So Commissioner, we do have a question. Jenny?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going back to the table with the numbers of
Okay.
pre-pandemic and then current. Is there, do you have the data indicating what the actual need is for each of these currently? How many the kids should be treated out there? We have that information.
Turn to the deputy commissioner here for that one. Thank you,
We
Senator.
do have data in terms of how many children are out of state that are in residential treatment programs. And we have the numbers of youth right now that we have placed in settings that we don't feel are necessarily ideal for them. So I can't give you an absolute number because it shifts. But right now, there's about 84 kids that are out of state in residential treatment. And when we're fully up and running, we'd love to bring a significant number of those kids back home.
Realizing that we might not have capacity to treat some of these kids in the state.
Exactly.
So then so we don't, how are you collecting that data? Is there a central location where all of this is coming in? So when a child needs support of a certain type, you're keeping track of that and what's not available for the kid, or how are you doing that?
You know, generally it's kid by kid. When they come in, we try to assess them on a case by case basis and then determine what's available in our existing, as you can see, diminished capacity for where we can place the kid. And then we do the best that we can based on that. So there is no real central place where all the data is located. It's more that we have a rough idea of how many numbers of kids we have coming in. And then we work on what we can do based on each youth that we have.
Okay, and then I'll just ask one last question, because I know this could be a long conversation. So as you're identifying kids who need specific support services, are you working to find a way to treat them either community-based or other?
Oh, absolutely. That's our adolescent services unit. We have really strong workers there that can determine, one, what we have on the ground in terms of supports and services, and whether or not we may need to move a youth depending upon their level of acuity, and then move a certain youth into that type of situation. So it's really, we're trying to tailor it as best we can, given the lack of supports that we have.
Okay, now if we were comparing what the needs are for each of these categories with what we currently have, is the pre-pandemic capacity, are we continuing to be at a deficit based on what the community needs are?
You mean if we had the pre-pandemic level?
Either pre-pandemic or current level. So
If we had the pre-pandemic,
are we, yeah.
we'd be in much better shape. People that have been with the division a lot longer than I have said they've never seen the situation the way it is now, where we've been forced to have staffings and alternative settings. So I'm thinking based on that, if we had at least the pre-pandemic capacity with the nice layers so the kids can go between levels as they need to based upon their levels of acuity, we'd be in much better shape than we are in now.
Okay, and then the other question I'll ask at some point, but you don't need to respond right now, are the types of community services that you're employing to help get us over the.
I can talk about that a little bit. One of the community-based services that we've been finding just invaluable is the support and stabilization services we have with Beckett, so that when we have youth that will be going home after they've stepped down from residential treatment, they have real nice wrap services at home to help them with, get reacclimated to living back with the family. And these are support services that will even take calls in the middle of the night, will come out and help the family in terms of counseling to really keep the youth back in their home setting, all with the idea of, we know that residential settings are not the best unless it's really, really indicated, but to try to keep a youth at home whenever possible.
Thanks. Thank you.
We have a few more questions here, Martin, and then Teresa.
Yeah, just to follow up to the Senator Lyons' question, as far as a pre-pandemic level. Is that the appropriate goal? Or, I mean, is there an ideal number that's higher than that you should be going after or that we should have? I mean, is that the standard against which we should be measuring our progress?
I think for now, it's a decent goal, but really based on all the science, the evidence-based information that we have, we're still committed to trying to keep as many youth as possible out of residential treatment. So I look at that number as the high mark, not in terms of trying to grow to have even more larger and larger residential treatment programs
Thank you.
to really strengthen our community-based supports and services.
So I guess as a follow-up then, so the community-based residential or outside of any of these?
Even outside,
Okay.
all of that would be necessary, but then even those supports where we can have the youth in the home getting the care that they need. That's sort of following along with the Family First Prevention Services Act, moving everything upstream. If we can get a kiddo help there before they even get into our system, that would be ideal.
Thank you.
Representative Lalonde, that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, continue, Commissioner.
Thank you. Now we'll speak a little bit about stakeholder engagement. I know there was a lot of feedback last year from the legislature about engaging appropriate stakeholders in the rebuilding and the design of the high-end system of care. This is the language from Act 78 that the Department for Children and Families, in consultation with the Department of Buildings and General Services, shall assemble a stakeholder working group to provide regular input on the planning, design, development, and implementation temporary stabilization facility for youth on the development of a long-term plan for the high-end system of care. So we do incorporate a lot of stakeholder input in all of our work, but the first official meeting of invited stakeholders is going to be very soon. You can see October 27th. The objective of that first convening is to build that operational framework and then identify who else should be included in the stakeholder engagement. And our intention here is that the input and involvement will not just be limited to the group required in Act 78. It's something we want to do as a principle of the work that we do, which is to include stakeholders, including those with lived experience in all of the work and design work that we do.
We have a question, Teresa.
Some of us had an opportunity to get a little bit of an update on this last week. And I guess one of the things that it's more of a comment than a question, Madam Chair, is that I appreciate the extent to which there's been a great deal of planning and some implementation. And I think that we would like to see that formal input from this stakeholder group. And I appreciate that the meeting's coming up tomorrow and initiating. And I think, Representative Donahue raised this concern in the previous meeting that it seems as though there's already been a bunch of decisions already made. And how would you incorporate, I guess I am forming it into a question, Madam Chair. How would you incorporate, let's just say we have feedback from this broad group of stakeholders that you are assembling that differs from the plan that you have kind of already laid out. How would you incorporate that? How would you move to address some of that feedback that I suspect that you will get?
I think I'll just start by saying that some of the decisions that we've made so far have, a lot of them have felt like and are crisis management. Right? So we're under tremendous pressure to get pieces in place because we have kids being staffed in inappropriate settings. It's putting those children at risk. It's putting our staff at risk. So we're trying to move as quickly as possible to a temporary facility and planning for a permanent facility. But I will turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Rand to talk a little bit more about how she would see incorporating that stakeholder feedback.
I have
First of all, I think it's.
comment. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, it's really important that we do have that type of input. And for example, with the permanent facility where we haven't settled on a site yet, We've done some preliminary ideas in terms of what the programming would look like, but that's why we put out an RFP to have someone that would be coming in to run the program for us. We were hoping to get additional input from them as well as from stakeholders in terms of what specifically should be included in our program to make sure we have the best type of care for our youth. So it'll be a discussion. And when there are those types of conflicts, I mean, we'll have a huge group there to sort of talk it out. And there's not so much that's set in stone yet where we can't make changes and be flexible. And I think that's really the important thing about having particularly folks with lived experience at the table, because those are the ones that can really tell you, this is what would have been necessary for me to have a better experience when I was in this type of situation. And I want to hear that.
Thank you. And I think that even though the state has the ultimate responsibility to choose a provider, to choose a contractor, I think it's really important to take that input even on the selection of providers, So I'm not imagining that you're going to have, 40 different providers, submitting responses to your RFPs. Be lovely if we had that kind of choice, but really involving the stakeholders in what are the elements of what we might call an ideal provider? What do we need to look for in that? I think that will be really helpful. So thank you.
So we have a question from Senator Sears.
Well, it's a question, but it's also kind of a comment. I think we can all agree that Rome is burning in terms of the juvenile system without a high-end program. And you started out with that, Commissioner. And yet, when I hear about stakeholder input, and we seem to be going the same old way, that same old system. And, it's been months and months and months and years that we've been up without that. And in the meantime, what's happening on the ground, and we'll hear later on from workers and other people who deal with it on a daily basis. And quite frankly, I have a lot of conversations with some of the people that run programs trying to deal with the lack of a high-end facility. It is really difficult. And I'm afraid that anything that holds up this process is just more going to be more and more difficult for people to survive in this. The staff burnout, both in DCF and in other facilities, is huge. When their kids are not in appropriate placements, it makes things more difficult for those that are in supposedly appropriate placements. And I just want to make sure that we're all understanding the sense of urgency, at least that I feel, in moving forward with this facility of any nature. And quite frankly, I don't think 4 beds is going to be enough. I think you have a minimum of 8 that you're going to need in terms of high end, but 4 would be better than 0. And that's where I just wanted to make that comment, because I just feel that this has really gotten to a really bad point. And it's not good for kids. It's not good for kids.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate what you're saying and agree with all of it. So now we can talk a little bit about the actual facilities. Senator Sears just mentioned 4 beds. That's the plan for a short-term secure stabilization temporary site. We made a number of stops and starts in other parts of the state that you're all well aware of, and landed on the Middlesex Therapeutic Community Residence as a place that's the quickest and easiest for us to get up and running right away, knowing the crisis that we're under, knowing the stress that it's putting on the entire system. This is where I think we can talk a little bit about program and then turn to Commissioner Fitch to talk a little bit about the building itself. The program is a reduced census from the previous uses where the Department of Mental Health and Family Services. The program will serve up to 4 youth in need of secure stabilization. Just like Senator Sears said, this is not going to be large enough to meet the full demands for secure treatment in the state, but it will address the most acute needs. It will take pressure off that very top end. It'll allow us to not have to shuffle kids through different programs to find the right space. So there'll be more stability within the system. It's not enough, but it's coming soon. And it does some to relieve the pressure while we work on other aspects of the system. We did issue an RFP for staffing of this facility, but there were no responses received to that. We're still working and outreaching to other local community providers to make sure we can get staffing ready for this. Commissioner Fitch, do you want to talk about?
Sure.
Facility and
So
status?
my name for the record is Jennifer Fitch, and I'm the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services. As Madam Chair said earlier, BGS is responsible for all state facilities, whether they're leased or owned. We have 240 owned facilities. We have another 120 leased facilities. So that falls underneath the jurisdiction of BGS, which is why I'm here today. And as Madam Chair said so eloquently in the beginning, it's BGS's job to provide facilities that meet the program needs of the customers that we serve. And in this case, it's the Department of Children's and Families. I think most of you know that we had Tropical Storm Irene, and as a result of Tropical Storm Irene, many mental health care patients were displaced from the Waterbury State Office Complex, another situation where we needed to find beds very rapidly around the state for this population. And one of the solutions was to bring in modular units to house up to 7 mental health care patients for the Department of Mental Health. So those were set up and erected in 2013. Obviously, they have been owned and maintained by BGS. So we have been maintaining those modular units. Though they were always planned to be temporary, and they are temporary. And so we had the ability, thanks to the support from the administration and the legislature, to build a permanent mental health care facility in Essex. It was opened late spring, early summer. And if you haven't had an opportunity to see it, I encourage you to do so, because it's a great model of how we're changing the way that we design and construct facilities to meet the needs of our clients, or in this case, residents. And so, like the permanent facility that we'll talk about here in a little bit, it's lighter, it's brighter, there's more earth tones, it's quieter, there's sound attenuation, it's softer, it's warmer, it's welcoming. And so it is a very different facility when we look at, for example, what Woodside looked like before we demolished it, right? Because again, we're changing the nature in how we design facilities for these populations. So going back to MTCR, after they moved, right, it now becomes a vacant facility and had residents in it before. And so when we talk about emergency and what do we have readily available that we could quickly fit up in an emergency situation, we felt that MTCR was the fastest solution to bring some alleviation to this immediate need. There are 7 beds in that facility. We have decided to fit up only half of that facility at this time for 4 beds. We felt, again, it's all about speed, and in the crisis, we wanted to do whatever we could do to speed up the timeline, and that's how that decision was made. So we issued an RFP for a construction manager, and that construction manager has been working with DCF and the BGS team. Part of putting together the schedule is looking at those long lead items. So for example, wallboard, we'll be installing some wallboard. That wallboard takes 6 weeks to procure, right? And then you need someone in the trades to install it. Same thing with the toilets. Those are longer lead items. So those are about 6 weeks. So what happens with a construction manager is once they have the final plans, which they have now, they look at both those long lead items as well as the trades that they need to actually install them. And then when they put together a construction schedule, right, that sequence when they're going to get the materials and when they can bring in those trades to fit up that facility. So at this point, we are targeting the end of January to have the facility fit up. Again, it's going to be dependent on those long lead items and making sure that those items are coming in as they're supposed to be. And I will just tell you, supply chain, ever since the pandemic, has been very challenging for BGS and has caused project delays. We hope that's not going to happen here, but I just want to be eyes wide open. End of January is the fastest we believe we can deliver that and hand it over to DCF.
So Commissioner Fitch, we're hardening up these modular units, which were through the capital bill. We had put money in to reclaim that site and not use those modular units. So this is a shift that's occurred since we adjourned in May. And there's going to be a cost to hardening up these units. How much is the cost? And where are the dollars coming from?
So the cost could be upwards of 1 million, though we think it will be substantially less than that. Because we're moving so rapidly, one of the things a construction manager or contractor does is they will increase that rate for things that may be unforeseen in that facility. And so right now, the cost estimate to do the work is around $600,000, but they did put up to $400,000 in contingency, again, to address any item that may be unforeseen as they go through and do that fit up work. In terms of the funding source, I will hand that back over to Chris.
I'll hand this to Erica.
We do have some funds set aside from the money that had been rolling over each year that would have been dedicated to Woodside. That's a part of the funding that we're using. And we also have some of the money that had been dedicated for the Newberry facility as well. So that's the primary two sources.
I want to be clear, it's not capital dollars.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Teresa.
Commissioner Fitch, I had heard, and I don't know whether this is accurate or not, so I'm just asking about that there were issues with water quality in Middlesex. Can you address that? Is the water?
Yeah, so in Middlesex, you either have arsenic or you have uranium. Depending on where the well is and what facility it feeds. There's multiple state-owned facilities on that site. Basara is there, Princeton Postal is there, the prior police barracks is there. So we have been aware of both the uranium and the arsenic on the site. What that means is up until this time, or I would say in the last couple of years, it would mean that people would not drink the water. You could obviously use it for showering and using it for toilets, but you wouldn't actually drink it. And so we had bottled water in all of the facilities on that site. However, at some point, people wanted to take a fresh look at that situation and say, is there anything that we could possibly do to remove arsenic and uranium in the water? And we have put in a filter system. So you can now drink it. I will tell you, we have Stephen Hubbs, who's our health and safety officer. He takes his job very seriously. He's very dedicated. And so he was the one that has been doing the water quality testing, working with the Department of Health and coming up with a solution to basically put in a filter system to remove the arsenic and lead out of the water. And again, we do quarterly water samples. All of those waters are at or below meeting that drinking water standard. So again, we're always double checking to make sure that the filter system is working correctly, obviously maintaining it and continuing to take water quality samples.
Can I just have one follow-up? So thank you for that on the water side of things. And then, obviously having outdoor space available for anyone who is living there, so the previous residents there, but, we're now looking at youth there. And, of course, driving by, you can see that it's a fenced-in area. Is there sufficient space to allow for outdoor use by the youth and staff?
It's a great question. There's actually two outdoor spaces. There's one that is larger. There's a basketball court set up there, and then there's a large green space around it as well. And that is meant for, many people to be in that space at the same time because again, it's larger. And then we also have a smaller, a more secluded area in case there's one or two people that would like to use that space in a quieter setting.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I do just want to emphasize the word temporary here on this slide. Given the nature of the building itself, temporary buildings that will ensure that it is temporary while we work toward a permanent site. Speaking of the permanent site, this is the DCF and BGFs have been moving to develop a secure campus setting that contains both short-term stabilization and treatment programs. The location and specific plans will be identified through the bid and design process, and we've been moving as quickly as possible to get to that RFP, which has now been issued. Both of the programs would be served by a common core space that houses education, recreation, wellness, and administration components. Again, using the lessons that we've learned through the years on secure placement and what's appropriate for youth. We have issued an RFP for staffing. Again, no responses received. And we're currently outreaching to community providers. I think once we have settled on a site and a facility, that will be attractive to a number of providers once they understand, I think, a little bit better what the program and what the building will be. And again, I'll turn to Commissioner Fitch for the status of that site project.
I have a
Yep.
question.
Senator?
If I can go back to the short term, so I fully understand, or the temporary, excuse me, not short term, but temporary. Between January and March, at some point, BGS will hand over the keys to DCF. At that point, will DCF commissioner or deputy commissioner be ready to move? Or are we in such a state that no providers are willing to come in and run the program? And what is our fallback plan if we don't get any provider?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. We are hopeful that we can get a provider up and running by then. We're continuing to have those conversations with some local providers. We have to stay optimistic about that. But I would say, in response to your question, worst case scenario, we would at least have a place for our staff to staff those youth in a safe way. That's not an emergency room. It's not police officers conference room, police station conference room. We're putting kids in some inappropriate, untenable situations. We're putting staff in difficult situations. So while we're working on getting a provider in there, I think it could still take pressure off the system to have a location where our staff, our state staff, can be with kids in crisis and in need of stabilization. I don't know if the Deputy Commissioner wants to add to that.
And I agree, that's absolutely that's not the scenario we're looking for. And in addition to doing outreach to local community providers to assess some interest in doing this, we are doing outreach nationally, particularly for those entities that we sent the RFP out, to get some feedback from them to see what we need to do in order to make that RFP more attractive. And even if we do have to do that fallback where we have staff coming into MTCR to do the staffing, we've done some other things to try to take the pressure off of my workers in terms of having an AHS-wide specialized response team that'll get training to be able to come in to assist with that staffing. And we also have had some contracts put in place with other providers to bring in additional folks called behavioral specialists to also assist us with doing that staffing, because it's critical to me to get the pressure down from our workers to be staffing. So it's bad enough to be staffing in these alternative sites, but even staffing at MTCR, I want us to have some help to do that. So it's not all balanced on our shoulders.
Thank you both. Thank you.
We have another question. Ginny?
I think you answered my question, really, to ensure that the staffing folks have the appropriate education and experience to handle the 4 youth who are coming in. And have we defined the kids who are going to be there, and are we matching up the workforce? This is maybe one of the really key things that we're interested in, but I think you've answered my question.
Particularly with the specialized response team, there's an entire training module that they'll be going through.
And I think it is worth saying once again how maxed out our staff are, the strain that they've been under a diminished system for a number of years, exacerbated by a pandemic. We're seeing acute care that's needed at levels we haven't seen before. There's just so much pressure on the system right now. I went to Williston to sit with our central intake emergency services group on Tuesday night, just to see, a couple of nights ago, just to see what it looks like every night to try to staff the kids that are coming through the system. And it's just an amazing triage and emergency, and it's sleuthing, it's investigating, it's trying to piece together some sort of help for these kids with inadequate resources. and they are burned out from it. And we are losing very good family services workers because it's just untenable. So, we really do need this short-term solution. We need to keep working on the long-term solution. And Commissioner Radke talked about some of the ways we're trying to bring relief to staff by bringing in some contractors, standing up this specialized response team to get other people who can do the staffing to take some of that pressure off of our family services workers.
So is it time to switch to Commissioner Fitch?
It was on the permanent side.
Yeah, I do.
You have another question? Okay.
Yes, Commissioner Fitch was reading it on my face. Will this site be licensed as a therapeutic community residence? And I should probably know the answer to this, but is licensing done? I know with Dale, like they license a whole cadre of things, but I don't think they license your homes, do they?
No.
You license your homes. Okay. So I guess one of the things, this is more of a thing, I guess, maybe for you to take back and consider. One of the things that I think that is important for us to think about is the potential conflict of interest of licensing homes that you operate, and how do we ensure sort of the separation of power, separation of authority in those situations. And so these are the kinds of questions that we'll be asking in January. So give you a little advance time to think about that, because I think that is something that, seems to be highlighted for us as we think about how we're developing a new system.
Thank you. And I definitely will take that time to think more about it, but that was really one of the critical issues with Woodside. And I know that's why we're really interested in finding an outside.
Yeah. But also recognizing that might not happen even on this temporary facility. And so, thinking about maybe even temporary situation where, perhaps you call upon your Dale colleagues to do outside review of a facility that you may end up operating yourself because of the temporary nature of it and inability to maybe find a contractor. So just urge you to sort of think about those things.
Absolutely. I mean, it falls back into the transparency and the accountability that Commissioner Winters was talking about.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So before we switch to Commissioner Fitch, I just want to be aware that in this past capital bill, we put in $1 million to start the process on the BGS and for this permanent site. And part of this RFP that's gone out came out of that $1 million in the capital budget. So let folks know that process. Commissioner Fitch.
Thank you. So again, this is all about speed, right? Because we know we're in an emergency situation and we need solutions as fast as possible. When BGS builds these types of residences, it takes us anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And the reason that it takes so long traditionally is because we need funding through the capital bill, and there's only so much money to go around in the capital bill. And these builds tend to be more expensive, right? Because they have more requirements when it's a resident versus an office building, for example. So again, this is all about speed. And so the fastest way to get a permanent facility is to do design build. So there's many different ways in which you can bring a project forward. You could do traditional design bid build, which is traditionally what we do through the capital bill. So you do the full design, then you put it out on the street, you bid it for construction, and then you move into construction. Design build is the fastest way to build a facility. And what that means is that you develop concept plans. So you have something to give a developer. And so you give it to them. And then what it is that you're meeting with them and you're designing and building at the same time. And that's what design build is. So instead of running things in parallel, you're running them concurrently. That's how you could speed something up and go faster. So given the increasing demand for limited capital bill dollars and understanding that we needed to go quickly, we pivoted after the session to use a different model, which is the design build model, which I talked about. And it will eventually transfer into a lease agreement. The lease agreement will be structured such that it's a 20-year lease with 4 5-year renewal terms. and the state has the option to buy anytime. So if at some point we have the funding available to purchase the facility and or the state wants to purchase the facility and own it, we will have the opportunity to do so. But up until that time, we will be working with the developer through a lease agreement. That lease agreement will be a fully gross lease. And what that means is they take care of everything for the facility. So they pay the utility bills, they take care of snow plowing, garbage removal, custodial, those kinds of things. And we pay for that through our lease agreement. So that's kind of the lease side of the house. On the design build side of the house, we hired White and Burke, which I did call Madam Chair, as well as Senator Ingalls, because again, we're pivoting from what was the original concept of this being a traditional project through the capital bill. And we knew we needed some help because BGS is a busy place. We don't often do these types of arrangements. So we knew we needed some horsepower in the room again to help us move swiftly through the process. I called Madam Chair as well as Senator Ingalls, and I said, would you mind if we use some of this money to hire White and Burke, which is a development firm, to help walk us through this process and aid us so that, again, we can move quickly and use your expertise as we do so. They both said yes. And so we have hired White and Burke to help us through that process. It was a two-step process, It was a request for qualifications first. It is a specialty facility. So we want to make sure whoever we release the RFP to, that they meet the qualifications for both designing and building this type of facility. So the RFQ went out to 25 developers. Basically, we scoured the entire state, again, working with White and Burke to make sure that we hit all the major developers around the state. We released the RFQ. We had 3 developers that responded to that RFQ, and they could respond in 3 different ways, obviously with their qualifications, but the secondary component was, would you be interested on building on a state-owned land, or would you be interested in building on your own land that you may have available? 2 of the developers came back and said, we would like to propose building on state land. And 1 developer came back and said, I'd like to propose using my own land. So given that, and we reviewed all their qualifications along with DCF, we all felt that those 3 developers met the criteria in the RFQ, and we supported each of those 3 developers getting the RFP. So in the interim period between the RFQ and the RFP, Sabrina Karish, who's the project manager, you may have heard her name before. She's fantastic. She's amazing. And she does all AHS facilities. That's what she specializes in. So the new mental health care facility in Essex was done underneath Sabrina. She's also working with DOC on women's correctional and reentry. So she is very much educated and up to speed, again, on how we design facilities today, right, versus how we built them before, to be lighter, brighter, dampen sound, be more connected to the outside environment, those kinds of things, right, higher ceilings, those kinds of things. So she's great. She's very gifted and talented. And so it's fantastic that she's working on this project. So she worked with an architect as well and the DCF team to come up with a conceptual plan. So that's them kind of getting down. And as Chairman says, we use program 2 different ways in this world to take their program needs, which is what you've been talking today. So how are we going to support the children? And then we translate that into what BGS calls a program, which is different and distinct. And that's when we take their requirements and then we pencil it down on a piece of paper. So basically it takes shape in the form of a building from the building aspect. And so Sabrina and the architect worked alongside DCF. We developed a concept plan as well as specifications, because specifications are, what type of toilets do you want? What type of wall do you want? So things along those lines have to be included, because in design build, you want to say right up front what you want those materials to be. And so it's really critical that you do the specifications along with the concept plans. In a traditional design build project, you're developing those specifications towards the end of that design cycle. Here, we're doing it in the beginning, again, because it's a different way that we build facilities. So the RFQ was released on September 15th. It is due November 10th. It is our intent to have the RFP. Thank you, Madam Chair. The RFP is due November 10th, and we fully plan to have a developer under contract through a notice intent and a work agreement starting January 1st of 2024, and have a facility substantially complete for move-in at the beginning of 2026, so 2 years. It is an aggressive timeline. Again, we're trying to do all the things that we can do to eliminate any potential risks in that project to the extent that we can influence it. And obviously, community support and engagement will be critical and key, as well as legislative support as well. It really takes a community, right, to help support bringing something that is currently a vision to fruition in physical space. We will need all of you to support us moving that forward. So that is where we are in terms of the RFP. All 3 developers are very passionate about this project, and they are all very eager to be awarded the opportunity to, again, design, build, and then lease us a facility.
Questions? That was easy.
Either that or I talk
Move
to
on before we change our mind, Matt.
We have just a couple of slides left. The next one is regarding staff secure crisis stabilization. So it's not just the new facility. It's not the Middlesex facility. These are some other programs that we have. We have the Windham County Sheriff's Building, and we are currently wrapping up the architectural and engineering phase there and working on a pretty aggressive schedule once again for that construction phase to begin. We're approved, the overall budget was approved for moving forward. We're finalizing some details and budget on the staffing. The staffing RFP will be ready for release within the coming weeks. Commissioner Radke, Deputy Commissioner Radke, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add about, a little bit more about what this, the size and what this program will offer as a part of the overall system of care.
Sure, it's staff secure crisis stabilization. So it's not the hardware secure building, and it will be for youth for longer term crisis stabilization. So not necessarily 2 weeks, but maybe even up to 6 months. We're still working out some of the details, but I believe it will be a 2 or 3 bed facility. Jennifer, do you?
It will be up to 3 beds.
Up to 3 beds. And it's again to stabilize the youth in order to move on to the next level of where they need to be, whether that's, back to another residential treatment program or even back home. And it's in the same building where we currently have the rest stop, which is one of the places where we do our staffing. So we've been used to going to that area. The sheriff's deputies and their dispatches at the top of the building. So it's someplace where we're used to going.
So who would oversee this program and offer the services to the juveniles that are there? And how does this facility, how is it different or how is it similar to what you're proposing at the Middlesex temporary units?
Good question. This again would be an outside program coming in to run the facility. It will be girls and boys, but it's different from Middlesex because Middlesex is more strictly short-term crisis stabilization. This is longer-term crisis, more stabilization with a treatment focus. So the kids can be there a lot longer. We're anticipating that.
So they could go from the Middlesex down here.
Absolutely, depending upon where they are with acuity and their level of safety. Because it's staff secure as opposed to hardware secure.
Because this is in the Windham County Sheriff's Building, but there wouldn't be any connectivity with the sheriff's office to provide services or oversight.
We do have a contract with them, but it's more formal. It's not simply because the sheriff's there. We'd have to actually ask them to come down and assist us. Sort of the way we do with the rest stop. When they're available, they do come down and help us, but it's not just because we're there. The sheriff is assisting us. We need to ask and they need to have availability.
Jenny? So as I'm looking at the facilities that will become more permanent, and then I'm going back to our little table and thinking about what's the need, do we achieve a goal of serving all the kids that have needs for these staff secure or other secure facilities?
Yes, definitely. I mean, as Commissioner Winters was talking about when he was working with CIES and just seeing how we're juggling and balancing, our need is so acute. We definitely need not just the secure level, but these are kids here that may or may not be justice involved. So there's absolutely a need for those kiddos as well. And it's just that, I don't know if it's the combination of the pandemic and everything else that's going on with the world. There's been such a, I don't know, spike with the level of trauma that's been going on with our kids. We need this type of facility as well, because this is what we want. That takes kids that don't necessarily have a justice involvement, but they still need that type of treatment and care.
Okay, and then with the outreach to community services for other lower level needs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
And with the goal of.
we're still not there. I mean, it's,
Kids down.
All pieces of the puzzle.
it is a puzzle, but it's also scary. It's a scary puzzle. We don't want to leave anyone out.
And it's multi-layered, and it's almost like our most acute need is at the top. But we can't forget the kiddos that are down here that will more quickly be able to be shifted back out into the community, sometimes with a wrap and sometimes without.
Thank you.
This is another project, Sabrina Karish, you're going to hear that name a lot, is managing on behalf of BGS, working with DCF very closely. As Commissioner Winters said, we are almost at the end. So we're in the construction document phase, which is the final phase of design. And then we will bid the project and have a contractor come in and fit up the space. So right now we are targeting the summer of 2024. Again, it's going to be dependent on the supply chain. It's just a really tricky situation. So we will have a more formalized schedule once a contractor has been bid. Once we bid it and we've had a contractor respond, they would give us our schedule at that time and we can give a more firm date. But right now we are targeting the summer of 2024.
So what's the anticipated cost and where are the dollars coming?
That is a great question, Madam Chair, and I knew you were going to ask that, and I forgot to grab that number. And I don't know, maybe Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner, you remember off the top of your head, but I think that it's around 1.5, 1.5.
Maybe, I'm not 100% sure.
I think it's somewhere between 1 and 1.5. I can get you that answer, Madam Chair. I'm happy to provide that.
Where's it coming from?
It's that same pot of
Same
rollover.
from DCO?
Mhm. Yes.
Well, we don't have inflation.
I know, at some point, we're going to need an accounting of that pot because it's been rolling over for several years now. And it would be great to say like, okay, this is where we started. This is what we used here. This is what we're using there. And like, what's the balance? So we need to be able to plan for what we might need for the future. So again, another January thing, okay?
Understood, because that rolling over, I'm glad we had that Woodside money, but now that we're finally taking actions, yes, we needed accounting. Understood.
2 more slides. This one is short-term secure treatment. Again, we have the Summit Transition Home in Newberry. As you all know, that we had plans to renovate that Summit Transition Home into a short-term treatment secure program, but that's been on pause during litigations with the Supreme Court, and we're waiting for a Supreme Court verdict to decide what to do next there. Anything you want to add to that, Erica?
No.
Have the arguments already been made?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, it could come out anytime.
okay, thanks.
Then the last slide is about psychiatric residential treatment, what we refer to as PRTF. It's a program in collaboration with the Department of Mental Health and the Department for Aging and Independent Living. We issued an RFP in May to develop a PRTF facility within Vermont that could serve up to 15 Vermont youths. The staffing was to be provided by that bidder. The RFP yielded a single successful bid, and the departments are currently engaging with the bidder in contractual negotiations there to stand up a PRTF program.
So what do you mean when you say develop a facility? Is facility building already in existence? Or are you talking about starting from scratch, building a facility and then a program there? Or is this dealing with just the program?
My understanding is the building already exists. Is that your Commissioner Fitch?
So in this particular one, I should be careful how I answer this. I'm not sure that BGS is overly involved in this one.
That sort of makes me believe, yes, this is one where the building already exists.
That's right.
And we'll be leasing the building? Because we lease, and we lease the building, or program going to be held in a building that we have no lease to?
I'm not certain.
So the successful bidder was the Brattleboro Retreat.
Okay, I didn't know if you were going to say that.
Okay.
And so we're ongoing negotiations with what that program looks like, what the requirements would be. And I think the cost of the building would be built into those contract negotiations. But as I understand it, there's an existing building. And we want to be very careful that they meet the program requirements that we are looking for. So that is still to be determined.
I'm just going to sort of like beat the oversight drum here. I know that it's sort of no secret that there's been issues with the Brattleboro Retreat. And I know that they have worked hard to rectify those issues and, continue to work on that. So it's a institutional based program. And how long would you expect you to be in residence there in this program? I mean, is it short term? Is it, you're referring to it as residential treatment. So I'm making an assumption that it's not a long-term placement, but I don't want to make an error in that judgment.
Some of those details we're still working out since it's a nice joint program between Dale and DMH and DCF. So I don't want to step out and say something that's incorrect at this point.
Okay.
And we are really absolutely, when we're talking about doing contract negotiations, it's really important to DCF that we get what we need out of that program. We don't need just another program that's not going to serve our most acute youth.
And I'm just going to say that this is going to be something that's going to be, that we're going to take a close look at, institutional based programming for youth, regardless of how quote unquote good it might be, is not exactly something that's in great favor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a response to your earlier question. So the current cost estimate for the Windham County Sheriff's Office for the 3 beds is $1.3 million for fit up. $1.3 million for fit up.
I'm looking at the time and I'm cognizant that BSEA is on a time schedule here too. So Jane has a quick.
I have two questions, and I don't know whether we're going to answer them fully today or another day, but so one question is, as we're looking at the distribution of kids from all over the state to all over different places in the state, what thinking has there been about families and how to maintain connection with their support folks? That's one question. Then the other question is, you've talked consistently about contracting out service. And it would be helpful to understand what those contracts are. Are those with some of our more local community services, DAs, SSAs, and others? And we certainly have a lot of very capable programs and people in state government working with adolescents, whether it's CSAC or higher ability or whatever. But then, so contracting out does become a lightning rod at some point when we think about contracting versus state employee issues. And I know we'll probably get into that at some point. Those are two questions. We don't need to get into them now, but it would be great to know what your thinking is there and what works most efficiently and best for kids.
Thank you, Senator. That's the end of our presentation.
Just as a follow-up, if you could also give us the
What's that?
geographic location. Could you give us the geographic, at some point, could you give us the Senator Lyons question? Could you give us the geographic location of the 155 current beds in the system? In other words, are 25 of them in Bennington, 25 in Burlington, that sort of thing?
We can do that. Thank you.
And if you could send that to Peggy Delaney, that would be great. And this question that was just asked is a good segue into our next folks who are Steve Howard with the SCA, as well as some other folks from the Labor Management Committee of the SCA and DCF. So any further questions of the two commissioners and deputy commissioner? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to stay in the room. We may have some more questions.
Thank you.
Okay. So Steve, you are on Zoom, as is Trissa Casanova, who is
Tracy
chair.
Casanova. Yep.
Yep, who is chair of the Labor Management Committee for DCF. So I'm assuming, Steve, you start. And what is your schedule? You're on a tight schedule, both of you?
I am on a pretty tight schedule. I think Tracy may have a little bit more flexibility than we thought she originally had. So, and since she's the expert anyway, it's probably better that way. But if you're ready, Madam Chair, I'm prepared to start.
We're ready. So if you could introduce yourself and go for it.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Steve Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Employees Association. I am here today with Tracy Casanova, who is the chair of the VSEA Labor Management Committee, which is a committee of our members and the management that meet regularly to discuss issues that are occurring in DCF. Tracy has worked for DCF for more than 20 years in a variety of positions. So she brings really a wealth of knowledge and experience, both historical and up to date. I have read the report, and as you are aware from my previous testimony, I've asked our members in the Department of Children and Families to give me guidance on what they would like me to say to you today. So it's not just Steve Howard coming up with something in the middle of the night. Really, DCF workers, family service workers across the state have had input into what we're saying here today. Our members in DCF Family Services are dedicated and committed to the successful care and supervision of Vermont's children who come into custody from a variety of past and complicated and often traumatic histories. Our members show up day in and day out in all hours of the day and night, weekdays and weekends, to do what is right by these children. We are failing. We, the people of Vermont, are failing. We do not have the resources we need to help these children at moments in their lives when they need us the most. We are not keeping the family services team that support them safe, nor are we providing them with the resources they need. We all need to do better. This is a community problem. Family services is often left holding the bag when everybody else taps out. They cannot do this alone. We need to invest in community partnerships. The members of the VSEA are grateful for the efforts of Governor Scott, Commissioner Winters, Commissioner Fitch, and Deputy Commissioner Radke and their staffs. We are grateful for the members of the General Assembly taking a look at this issue, and we generally want to work together. We are prepared to work collaboratively to find solutions to the tsunami facing our state due to the lack of appropriate settings in which to provide safe and meaningful help to our most traumatized children. We are not safely serving or treating these children. We are failing to make the necessary investments in them. The number of staffings by our members has doubled in just 1 year, while the number of safe settings in which to treat and care for these kids has been slashed in half. Really because of staffing, as you heard from the commissioner earlier, the lack of safety, with folks not feeling safe about taking certain youth into their setting, and really the divestment of state resources in state-owned facilities. We have lost a number of appropriate settings, and we need to invest in these more. Our members are desperate. They are desperate. And they are watching as good people, experienced and competent in DCF Family Services, are making decisions they know they shouldn't make and would never make, except they have no other options. Desperation has set in. In the past few months, our members have reported to their union multiple incidents of near misses, where bad decisions, poor communication, in a system that is overwhelmed, narrowly missed a catastrophic outcome. Bad things have already happened. I don't have to remind this committee that we've already had one family service worker murdered, one family service worker sexually assaulted. Bad things have already happened, and we have had a number of near misses in the recent past that could have had the same catastrophic outcome. Our members fear that our luck is running out, and they are extremely concerned about that. They describe this current situation as a ball of fire in the midst of a state of emergency. And let me be clear, the administration has worked hard to put infrastructure in place. We are 4 years into this situation. Many of the promised alternatives have not come to fruition for reasons often beyond their control. This has become an invisible problem. The problem has not disappeared. Kids in the high-end system of care are essentially homeless because we don't have appropriate facilities to meet their needs, which are complex trauma, histories of aggression, sexual assault, and psychiatric issues. Kids with harmful behaviors are also in this population. And while we appreciate the proposals outlined in the report we are here to discuss today, our members are very skeptical. Skeptical because so many elements of these proposals have been on the table for so long, and so many previous efforts towards a solution have failed to materialize. We are concerned that there is no plan B, leaving our members to wonder what happens then. Our members are exhausted, demoralized, and they are giving up. We cannot sustain what is currently occurring much longer. The anguish, the pain, the exhaustion, and the trauma is plainly evident when you speak with them. Traumatized because, as they describe it, the system is imploding. Community partners are angry. They are frustrated. They are giving up on DCF in the state of Vermont. From law enforcement to hospitals, once reliable partners have had it, and real damage has been done to these relationships. They are tired, and they want the state of Vermont to get its act together. The lack of beds for youth is a risk to them, and it's a risk to our communities. It's spilling out all over the evening news every day. There are more stories of violent encounters of young Vermonters, all because returning youth to the community before they've had the ability to get help, the help they need, puts your constituents in jeopardy. This is a public safety crisis. Let me be clear. We cannot wait 6 years, 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 hours, or 6 minutes for a solution or even some relief. We need action now. The members of the VSEA are calling on the governor to declare a state of emergency for DCF family services and to do it today. Cutting red tape and moving the total force and all available resources of state government to bring to fruition immediate beds of any type. This is not an unprecedented move by governors. In just a few miles from the great county of Bennington, where Senator Sears is seated today, Governor Healy has declared a state of emergency and deployed the National Guard to help with her crisis housing of migrants in hotels all across her state. It's not an unprecedented move, and it could be done here today. We urge the governor to deploy the National Guard to construct more beds and to provide security to our family service members in situations where the threat of violence is great. Our members in family services are being asked to perform work as residential counselors, for which they have some applicable skills, but for which they have not been trained to safely monitor kids who pose a threat of violence. We call on the Scott administration to convert available, already owned state properties in central Vermont and in Chittenden County in particular to temporary beds. In just a few days, we're going to lose one of our facilities that's used regularly in Lamoille County, Yellow House. It's going to be going back to a warming shelter, and that will leave our state with no safe environments in the northern part of the state to safely staff these kids. We call on the governor and the legislature to open the temporary 4-bed facility in Middlesex by Thanksgiving, not by January, not by March, and to put in place the proper leadership and independent oversight of that facility that will guarantee we are safely stabilizing youth in this facility. We call on the governor, this committee, and members of the General Assembly to take time out of their schedules to spend a shift at central intake, or to go out with family service workers to do a staffing to see upfront and close what we are asking these state employees to do and how our lack of resources impacts the children in our custody. We ask this committee before you leave today to write to the governor and to support our calls for these actions and to demand that they report to you and to the public on a weekly basis on the progress that they're making. Vermont needs to come together like we are facing a flood, a pandemic, a statewide emergency. These kids are our kids, and they need our help right now. VSEA members go to bed every night knowing that the current level of danger we are exposing our members to in family services, both physically and mentally, that it's only a matter of time before our luck is run out, and yet another member of the DCF family is attacked, or even worse, killed in their service to the children they care so much about. These kids deserve our help. Our members are safer when we have adequately invested in the system of care they need and deserve. Let's invest in these kids and keep VSEA members safe and secure in the process. And that is the statement that our members wanted to make to you today, Madam Chair. And I know Tracy has some testimony to augment what I've offered here today.
So Steve, I know you're on a tight schedule. Tracy, I want to give you a chance too, but before we switch to you, are there any questions of Steve, Teresa, and then Jenny?
Thank you for being here, Steve, and representing the state employees and the hard work that they've been doing. You referenced the plan that has been set out and the update that in the report that we recently received. What I wasn't clear about is whether or not the people that you represent believe that plan is sufficient, or if they, believe. I recognize that they have what you said in terms of they kind of feel like they've heard it before and haven't seen it come to fruition. I recognize that, but if it came to fruition, do the people you represent feel like that plan is sufficient to deal with the needs that they are seeing? Again, it comes back to stakeholder, including state employees, stakeholder input, and trying to determine how much state employees have factored into this, sort of the rank and file members who are doing the work have factored into this plan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that is a very important question. I will say that our members, as I said earlier, are sort of have the attitude they'll believe it when they see it. But what they would say is they are supportive of the efforts that are outlined in the plan. And they are, as I said, desperate for anything. If they could turn the State House into a facility, a temporary facility to house these youth, they would be for that. We are on fire. So I think we're in a situation, as Commissioner Winters, I think, said rightly, where we are in a crisis management mode, hour to hour, minute to minute. So it's really hard for them to focus on the long-term solutions and the adequacy, but they would say that any additional capacity is absolutely essential. But they are extremely concerned that the timeline for these projects, particularly the Middlesex project, started in January, first slipped to March. Sounds like it might be back in January, but we could use this last week. We needed it last week. So we've got to bring to bear all of the resources of the state to get that facility open in the next couple of weeks. We're in such a dangerous environment that they really are focused narrowly on, can we just get these beds open now? And then I think they'll have more time to think about the longer term focus.
Thank you.
Can I go to Senator Sears? I have a question. Can I go to Senator Sears first?
Is she ahead of me?
Yeah. Senator Sears.
Always is.
Senator
Yeah.
Sears and then Jim.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to have a copy of your remarks, if you can make them available to
That would
Peggy so
do.
they can be posted.
Yes.
Secondly, this isn't quite out of left field, but it's sort of. The only place I know we can make it happen in 6 hours or 6 days is at a correctional facility, which would be a horrible example. But taking a wing of a certain correctional facility could be done and could be providing 4 to 8 beds on a temporary basis. And I don't expect you to answer this today, but I'm wondering if that's something that the department, or excuse me, the VSEA would support, given that we're talking state employees, perhaps DCF workers having to help with corrections officers in dealing with this population. It's the only thing I can think of that can be done in 6 hours or 6 days or whatever it would take. And it's not ideal. I want to make clear I'm not talking about locking kids up. I don't want to do that, but I don't see any other choice. It looks like it's going to take at least till January to get Middlesex up and going. And if we are in that situation where it needs to be done right away, I don't think there's any other choice.
Thank you for that question, Senator. I appreciate that. And I will just get a little caveat. I haven't done any poll on that particular question or talked to members, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say, absolutely, we would support that. We are in a desperate situation that is, as I said earlier, these folks, these kids who have so many complex challenges are essentially homeless. And while you, as you said rightly, it's not ideal, we will just about take anything because we are desperate. Our members are just desperate, and the system is collapsing. And it's just, I think I can't emphasize that enough. It's an emergency. It's an emergency. It's an emergency. And so I think we would likely support that. I would have to ask them, but I think I can feel confident, and Tracy will certainly add to the testimony when she testifies that they would be supportive of that on a temporary basis.
It's a thought, just thinking through which facility and how that would work. Anyway.
Right, thank you. Steve, thanks very much for coming in and sharing what our employees, state employees are sharing with you. And I will reiterate what Senator Sears said. It would be great to have your testimony in writing with bullet points of those things that you believe would be most effective in quickly correcting or moving forward in a new direction. Can you also, when you're doing that, let us know how many workers actually responded? I'm assuming you sent out some kind of questionnaire or you met with them individually, but it would be great to know the numbers of folks who feel. Some people may not even have had time to respond, because I do know folks who are in this situation. You did mention something about central intake. And that suggests some improvement in IT. There are some things that we as legislators can do. There's things that we can't do. I don't know that we can call out the National Guard, but that's a out of the box thinking. It does put public safety again front and center in taking care of kids who have mental health and other critical needs. So it would also be interesting to know what additional training folks would need in order to be most effective in their work, or is it just a matter of time? Is it that they need more time and more workforce? So there are a lot of questions that you have raised in your with your information. It'd be great to get that. I think so. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. And I'm very happy to provide this in writing. It may take me a little while because I'm packed today with meetings, but I will try to get it in the next 48 hours. I will try to get this to you. I will say, Commissioner Winters, to his credit, spent a shift at central intake. And I think you heard from his testimony today how genuinely impressed he was, or maybe even shocked by how challenging the struggle is to find someplace safe for these kids to go, and to make sure that the staff that are being asked to staff them are also going to be safe in that environment. And when we say that we're calling on the governor to call out the National Guard, it's for construction purposes, to build up beds, but also to provide security. Law enforcement has not been able to meet the need. They're facing their own staffing challenges. They are frustrated with us, with DCF, but we still are sending our members into situations, where it's highly recommended that a law enforcement officer be there, and there isn't a law enforcement officer there because they're not available. And so we're asking that the National Guard potentially be a resource to accompany our members to those staffings. Not that we would ask them to do those staffings instead of our members. That's just, I want to make sure I'm clear about that, because our members have a fair number of skills, and you're going to see that Tracy Casanova can talk directly to those. They have a lot of de-escalation skills. They have a lot of training, but they are not trained residential counselors. And that is a big, Senator Sears knows that there's a big difference. And it presents a number of issues that our members just are not prepared to handle. And so I hope I addressed, I'm not sure if I addressed all your questions, but I can certainly try again if I haven't.
No, thank you. I think your written information will be very helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions for Steve? Tracy? Shift it over to you. And we'll look forward, Steve, to seeing the hard copies of your presentation.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for inviting me and allowing the opportunity to come speak with you all today. Like Steve mentioned, I am the chair of the Family Services Labor Management team. And I'm actually one of the staff who also volunteers to staff some of these youth at alternate locations. I have been with the department. I'm going on this January will be my 21st year working for Family Services. And in that time, 13 of my years of service was as a social worker in the St. Albans District Office, as a juvenile probation officer, a child protection worker, and an investigator. I currently serve in the role as Deputy Compact Administrator for our interstate programs, as well as the Human Trafficking Consultant for the division. In my 20 years at working at Family Services, I have never seen us in the crisis that we are in within our system of care. I have never seen us having the need to staff children across multiple settings at the same time. You would see that every so often pop up of one kid that might need to be staffed like overnight until like a bed at the retreat or one of our other programs opened up. We've never experienced this need for multiple staffing and the level of acuity that we're seeing within these kids that we're serving. I want to start off by saying I really appreciate all the work that has been done by the administration in trying to stabilize our system of care, our high-end system of care. And I will say, there's continued to be delays in putting into action a plan that's going to release the pressure valve that's on our system right now. And some of these ideas, they're not new. They have been talked about for years now, that I've been hearing about it in labor management, and they have not come to fruition. And it's not as a result of not trying, but there continues to be things that come up that are beyond anybody's control, which is why we need to have concurrent plans. We are in a state of emergency, and thus we need an emergency response, and we need your help because we can't do this alone. We do not have the system in place in order to keep these kids safe, and myself and my peers, the staff within Family Services safe. We are not serving these kids, these Vermont kids, with the treatment, and we can't wait any longer. We have been waiting now for years and been told to just hold on a little bit longer just until something's in place, and something still hasn't. And in fact, the problem is getting worse. The number of children that family services workers has been called out has doubled. So just to give you some numbers, in 2020, we deployed 151 staff to go staff youth. In 2021, that number went up to 187 staff that were called out. In 2022, we were up to 485 staff who were called out. This is in addition to doing their normal 7:45 to 4:30 job as a family services worker, either doing investigations, child protection work, or juvenile justice work. This is burning our staff out and traumatizing them as well. And while I think the hope is that the need is going to diminish with all of the things that we're trying to put in place, but it's not getting better. In this past July, we had a staffing crisis that resulted in the deployment of every single on-call worker that we had in the state. And while there's this thought that maybe that was just an anomaly and that was likely not to happen again, I just want to say it's still happening. In the last couple of weeks, we have had 4 to 5 staffings occurring across multiple settings in different locations that has required at least a minimum of 9 family services workers deployed around the clock. And in the instances where we can't get law enforcement because they're not available and a youth might need law enforcement due to the risk that they serve to themselves, our staff, or the community, we're either sending those kids back home because they're too dangerous for us to staff, or we're then doing 3-to-1 staffing ratios of 3 family services workers to one child. We have one situation right now where we've had this 3-to-1 staffing going on at least a week right now. This is not sustainable. These kids have a history of complex trauma, psychiatric issues, histories of aggression, sexually harmful behaviors, and they can't be maintained in the community, and they need more. We have youth across multiple communities who are organizing themselves, who are engaging in violent acts and use of firearms. These organized groups are security risks to our staff and communities. And due to the lack of system of care, we're returning them home into their community, which is not reducing the risk for anyone. This rotating of staff that these kids are experiencing, it is not good for them. We know that. We know that this is traumatizing them, and it's traumatizing our staff, and it's compromising everybody's safety, the child's, our staff's, and the community. So we need help now, and we can't continue to wait for more time. I agree with everything that Steve said about the needs, and we have been trying to brainstorm together around what creative ideas and solutions we have that we can come up with for a solution right now. Because the reality is it's not just one solution. We need multiple facilities in order to address the multiple needs of the children and youth in Vermont. And so we need your help in coming up with the solution and really advocating for us. And I do invite people to come in whatever capacity they can to our hotline, or come to district offices and come to some of these staffings so that you can see directly for yourselves as to what we're facing and what's going on, so that you can hear directly from the field in those situations and from the youth who are being staffed about our lack of system of care right now. And that concludes my testimony at this time.
So I just have one question. In your time that you've been involved with DCF in this population, what age groups right now are you seeing are the most traumatized? And in your time, are you seeing that there are younger juveniles, younger folks who are being in this situation more than in the past? You've seen any change over time, but also what you're seeing now, what age groups are you looking at?
So I think the kids that we're seeing, their needs are far more complex than I've ever seen in my career. that kids who have mental health issues and behavioral issues, they're just really peaking. And then if you add in, they might have some learning disabilities or have some developmental delays, it's really complicated, the profile of children that we're seeing, in order to meet all of their needs. And I know our agency isn't just struggling with those challenges as well in terms of how to serve those populations. In terms of ages, it's hard for me to say in terms of whether or not there's been a shift, because my role isn't necessarily to collect data on that. I can tell you that I have personally staffed a child as young as 10 who has needed high-end system of care staffing. I can tell you last week, or maybe it was this past week, we were looking again for staff to staff a youth as young as 10. But I feel like the majority of youth are probably in the adolescent range of probably 14 to 17 years old. But I'm not the person that collects that data, so I can't speak definitively about that. It's really anecdotally on what I'm seeing. Does that answer your question?
Yes, as best as you can. I'm just wondering if it's a younger age that's coming in, and I can't help but think that social media doesn't have an impact on this. Yeah. Questions, thoughts? Pretty quiet. Senator, you want to weigh in?
Well, I just wanted to ask a question. I've heard a lot from my local police department about out-of-state kids coming here because of our juvenile laws. Yours seem to be mainly talking about Vermont kids. Is that correct?
I am, but because I'm the person who's responsible for these out-of-state youth who need to be returned, I am very well aware of what they're talking about and experiencing. So when I'm taught,
Are they some of that group then that's difficult to place and you send back home?
absolutely. It's a little more complicated with those situations because the ICJ compact dictates certain things for us, but those kids are especially the situations that they're being picked up in. Like a lot of those kids are in this high risk security groups. They are self-identifying as gang involved from other states. They have history. They're even being found with guns and large amounts of drugs in their possession. And so the problem is very complicated. And I have heard the same theme from law enforcement that some of these drug traffickers from other states are very well aware of our lack of system of care here in Vermont for our youth. And so they're using kids to do this across state lines and specifically through our state, because they know that there's not a lot that we're going to do and that we're going to try to get these kids back. Like, we have to get them back home. We're required to, but that we're going to do it in a different way than if it was a youth from Vermont. So
Thank you.
Pretty sobering. And I think the other part that's also playing into this, and I think a testimony we received last year, is the willingness of our youth not only having access to more weapons, but the willingness to actually use them. And that's been a big shift that we have seen over the past few years.
I would agree with that. If you just watch the news and see the number of reports regarding young people who would fall within the DCF purview who are engaging in acts of violence, and when there's a intersection of a use of a firearm of some sort or a deadly weapon, or engaging in a crime that falls under a Big 12, that we're seeing a lot more of that within our communities. And that's a shift from something that we hadn't previously been seeing. We'd have pockets of youth who presented with this level of dangerousness, and we're having a lot higher number of those kids who are coming within our system, coming into our system of care.
Erin, anything else from the committee? Any other questions, thoughts?
Thank you.
Whoops.
No, I just say thank you. Obviously, it's an all hands on deck issue and time. I think we all are in that mode.
Yeah.
And figuring out that there isn't a silver bullet here. There is prevention. There's intervention, there's treatment, all of those things that we know are so important for a variety of issues. So thank you. Thank you for your work. And thank you for bringing the information to us. And again, it would be very helpful to have it in written form so we could rely on it. Thank you.
I can work on getting that out.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you, Steve, as well. This has been very informative, and we'll continue having a discussion short today. It is on our schedule here for a committee discussion later on this afternoon. I don't know if folks want to jump to that now, if they want to just continue this conversation on juvenile justice issues and committee discussion on it, or if you want to wait until this afternoon when it was scheduled around 2:30. We do have 15 minutes here before break or 12 o'clock. Leave it up to the committee to decide. It's not all speak at once.
I'm good with finishing early and then being able to think through, and we've got other folks coming in.
So take lunch now.
Yes.
Do that. Thank you both, Tracy and Steve. Thank you. And we will, Dick, is it all right to close up this morning's time and come back at 1 o'clock?
Absolutely.
So why don't we do that?